There was a point in time when the greatest footballer the world has ever seen was not considered special, not because of a lack of talent, but because of something far more limiting, something his body simply refused to do: grow. Long before the stadiums, the trophies, and the millions of people chanting his name, Lionel Messi was just a small boy in Rosario, Argentina, chasing a ball across uneven ground, unaware that the very thing that would almost end his career before it even began would later become the foundation of everything that made him unstoppable. Because at just 11 years old, while other kids were beginning to grow stronger, faster, and more physically dominant, Messi's body began to fall behind in a way that couldn't be ignored. It wasn't just that he was shorter, it was that he wasn't growing at all. At an age where development defines potential, doctors delivered a diagnosis that quietly reshaped the trajectory of his life: growth hormone deficiency, a condition that meant his body simply wasn't producing enough of the hormone required to grow properly, a biological limitation that, without treatment, could permanently prevent him from reaching a normal physical stature. And in football, where size, strength, and physical presence are often seen as prerequisites for success, this wasn't just a medical issue. It was a potential ending, because no matter how talented you are, there is always a moment where reality intervenes, where the physical demands of the sport begin to outweigh raw ability. And for Messi, that moment seemed inevitable. But the diagnosis didn't just come with uncertainty, it came with a cost, a treatment that required daily hormone injections, every single night, over the course of years, and not just for a short period, for as long as it took for his body to catch up. The price of that treatment was far beyond what his family could afford: hundreds of dollars every month, in a country where opportunities were already limited, and where investing that kind of money into something with no guaranteed outcome was not just risky, it was almost impossible. Still, they tried. Local clubs were approached, opportunities were explored, but time after time, the answer came back the same: no. Not because he wasn't talented, but because he was too small, too fragile, too much of a risk. And in that moment, the dream didn't just feel distant. It felt like it was slipping away. But sometimes, the difference between giving up and continuing isn't found in certainty. It's found in belief. Because while the world saw limitation, Messi's family saw something else. They saw the way the ball stayed glued to his feet. They saw how he moved differently, how he didn't rely on strength, how he didn't need size. They saw something that didn't fit the traditional mold. And that belief led to a decision that would change everything. A decision to leave everything behind, to cross an ocean, to take a risk that had no guarantee of success. At just 13 years old, Messi moved from Argentina to Spain, joining FC Barcelona. Not as a star, not as a prodigy the world already knew, but as a boy with potential and a condition that still needed treatment. Barcelona saw what others didn't, not just talent, but possibility. And they agreed to cover the cost of his medical treatment, something no one else had been willing to do. But even with that opportunity, nothing was guaranteed. Because treatment doesn't erase struggle, it doesn't remove doubt, and it certainly doesn't make the journey easier. Every night, Messi had to inject himself with growth hormone, a routine that most people would never experience. A reminder every single day that his body wasn't like everyone else's, that he was still catching up, still fighting against something he couldn't control. And during the day, he stepped onto the pitch alongside players who were bigger, stronger, and physically ahead of him. Players who didn't have to think about their bodies in the same way. Players who didn't have to fight the same battle before the game even began. And yet, something started to happen. Because while his body may have been smaller, his relationship with the ball began to evolve in a way that no one else could replicate. He didn't move like the others. He couldn't. So he adapted. His center of gravity stayed low. His steps became shorter, quicker, more precise. The ball never moved far from his feet, because it couldn't. He didn't have the stride length to push it ahead and chase it like others did. Instead, he kept it close, so close that defenders couldn't predict where it would go next. And without realizing it, the thing that was supposed to hold him back began to shape the way he played. Because when you can't rely on strength, you learn control. When you can't rely on size, you learn balance. And when you can't overpower your opponent, you learn to move around them. What started as a limitation slowly became an advantage. Not immediately, not obviously, but consistently. As the years passed, the injections continued. The growth came slowly, not dramatic, not overwhelming, but enough. Enough for him to compete, enough for him to stay in the system, enough for his talent to keep developing. And as his body began to stabilize, something else accelerated. His understanding of the game, his rhythm, his ability to move through space in a way that felt less like running and more like gliding. By the time he reached Barcelona's first team, the conversation had already started to shift, because now, the same traits that once raised concerns were becoming impossible to ignore. Defenders couldn't take the ball off him, not because he was stronger, but because he was lower, more balanced, more connected to the ground, every movement efficient, every touch intentional. It wasn't just skill, it was mechanics, a style of play built on the very thing that once threatened to stop him. And when he stepped onto the biggest stages in football, that style didn't disappear, it amplified. Because at the highest level, where margins are smaller and mistakes are punished instantly, his ability to control the ball in tight spaces became something no one else could match. Players tried to adapt, tried to close him down faster, tried to use their physical advantage, but it didn't work, because you can't tackle what you can't predict, and you can't predict someone who moves differently than everyone else. What looked like improvisation was actually precision. What looked like instinct was actually repetition. Years of adjusting, years of compensating, years of turning limitation into control, and over time, the narrative completely changed. He was no longer the small kid trying to keep up. He was the standard, the player others tried to understand, the one defenders studied, and still couldn't stop. Goals followed, then records, then moments that didn't just win games, but defined eras. Because this wasn't just about scoring, it was about how he did it, dribbling through entire defensive lines, keeping the ball impossibly close, moving in a way that felt almost disconnected from the pace of the game, as if everything around him slowed down, just enough for him to stay in control. And the most remarkable part of it all was that none of it existed without the struggle, without the diagnosis, without the injections, without the years of being physically behind, because the style that made him great wasn't built in perfect conditions. It was built in response to imperfection. It was built because he had no other choice. And that's what transformed him, not just into a professional player, not just into a world-class athlete, but into something far rarer, a player whose greatest strength was once considered his greatest weakness. Because in a sport that often rewards physical dominance, Messi rewrote the equation. He showed that control could replace power, that balance could replace strength, that intelligence and rhythm could overcome physical limitations. And by the time he lifted the World Cup, completing a career that had already surpassed expectations long before that moment, the story had come full circle, because what people saw in that moment wasn't just a trophy. It was the result of years of quiet persistence, years of doing something difficult, consistently, years of believing in something that, at one point, didn't seem realistic. And when you look back at the beginning, at the diagnosis, at the uncertainty, it becomes clear that this was never just about football. It was about adaptation, about resilience, about the idea that sometimes the thing that feels like it's holding you back is actually shaping you into something different, something better. Because Lionel Messi didn't become great in spite of his condition. He became great because of how he adapted to it. And in doing so, he didn't just overcome a limitation, he transformed it into the most precise, controlled, and unstoppable style of football the world has ever seen. And that's what made him the greatest. And what makes that transformation even more remarkable is how invisible it became over time. Because once you reach a certain level of greatness, people stop asking how you got there. They stop thinking about the process. They stop seeing the struggle. All they see is the result, the goals, the highlights, the moments that look effortless. But effortlessness is often the final stage of something that once required everything. And in Messi's case, that illusion of ease was built on years of repetition that very few people ever witnessed. The quiet routines, the disciplined habits, the nights where progress felt slow or non-existent. Because growth, real growth, doesn't always feel like progress when you're inside it. Sometimes it feels like standing still. Sometimes it feels like falling behind. And sometimes it feels like questioning whether the path you're on is even worth continuing. But what separated him wasn't just talent. And it wasn't just opportunity. It was the willingness to continue through phases where nothing seemed to change, to trust that small improvements, repeated over time, would eventually lead somewhere meaningful. And that mindset didn't just shape his body or his game. It shaped the way he approached everything, with patience, with consistency, and with a kind of quiet confidence that didn't need to be announced. Because when you've spent years building something in silence, you don't need to prove it. It shows.